I live alone in a townhouse built sometime in the early 1900s. It's old enough that the floorboards creak and the walls hum faintly with the ghost of conversations past. But until yesterday it was mine. A known space, predictable in its quirks and flaws. That changed last night. I was in the kitchen rinsing out a mug when I noticed something odd about the hallway. The light was different, a subtle shift in the shadows as though the walls had drawn back or expanded. I glanced toward the source, expecting maybe a window left ajar or the reflection of a car's headlights. But instead I saw it, a door, set flush into the wall at the far end of the hall, as though it had always been there. Old wooden with a tarnished brass knob. The paint was chipped, the surface marred with faint scratches as though something had clawed at it long ago. I froze, water still running over my hands. There had never been a door there. I knew the layout of my home like the back of my hand. That wall led to the side of the building, to nowhere, and yet there it was. The air in the hallway was still heavier than it should have been. The usual hum of the pipes and the quiet creak of settling wood were absent. I turned off the tap, dried my hands, and approached the door. The closer I got, the colder the air became, cool and dry, like stepping into a cellar. I reached out and touched the knob. It was icy, a stark contrast to the ambient warmth of the house. I hesitated, but something compelled me to turn it. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The walls were rough, unfinished wood, damp with age. A faint smell wafted up, something earthy and old, like wet stone mixed with the faint trace of iron. I didn't remember ever having a basement. The stairs were steep, uneven, slick with moisture. I should have turned back, should have shut the door and pretended I'd never seen it. But the darkness pulled at me, thick and tangible, and before I knew it, I was stepping down, one hand brushing the wall for balance. The light from the kitchen faded as I descended. The air grew colder, denser, wrapping around me like a too heavy blanket. Each step creaked softly, not with the sound of old wood, but with something deeper, almost wet. At the bottom, I found a room. It wasn't large. The walls were rough stone and the ceiling arched low, forcing me to stoop. The floor was dirt, damp and packed hard. Faint symbols were etched into the stone walls, spirals and jagged lines that shimmered faintly when I moved. In the center of the room was a wooden table. On it, a box. The box was old, small, bound with tarnished metal hinges. It pulsed faintly as though it were breathing in the dim light. I didn't want to touch it, but my hand moved without my consent, fingers brushing the cold surface. The hum started then, a low vibration threading through the floor into my bones. It wasn't sound. It was feeling, a pressure that built with every second I remained there. I tried to pull away, but my hand stayed. The box creaked open, its hinges groaning softly. Inside was nothing. Or at least that's what I thought at first. But as I peered closer, the darkness inside shifted like ink dispersing in water. Shapes formed, tall, thin figures, pale eyes like pinpricks of light, mouths that opened too wide, stretching into impossible grins. The pressure increased, a weight that made my chest tighten, my pulse quicken. The figures shimmered, then reached, their arms elongating, fingers brushing the edge of the box. I yanked my hand back, stumbling, falling against the wall. The box snapped shut with a sharp crack, the hum fading instantly. I scrambled back up the stairs, not looking back. When I reached the kitchen, I slammed the door shut and locked it. But the cold remained. I told myself it was a dream, a trick of the mind, a moment of misremembered architecture. But this morning, when I went to check, just to be sure, the door was still there, and now there are faint scratches on the inside of the door as though something has been trying to get out or back in. Last night the tapping escalated. I had told myself not to listen, not to give in. But the sound was unavoidable. It wasn't just coming from the basement door anymore. It was threading through the walls, pulsing in the floorboards, breathing in the spaces between the floor and ceiling. I could feel it in my teeth, in the tremor of my bones. I stayed in bed, covers pulled up to my chin, every light in the house on. I watched shadows crawl across the walls, twisting in ways that didn't match the light fixtures. My breath felt too loud in the silence, a rasp that filled the space like static. And then the door creaked open. Not a lot, just an inch, enough for a sliver of absolute black to appear, deeper and darker than the shadows in the rest of the house. I heard the hum intensify, no longer subtle but rising, vibrating like a tuning fork buried in my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, pretending not to hear, not to feel, but the tapping continued. Faster, sharper, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I opened my eyes. The gap in the door was wider, and then it stopped. The tapping, the hum, everything ceased at once, leaving behind a silence so complete it was deafening. I sat up, body trembling, straining to hear anything at all. For a moment I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had been scratching and tapping had given up. But then, faintly, almost too soft to catch, I heard breathing. Not mine. Something deep, slow, wet. It was close, just beyond the door, as though something was pressing its face to the gap, waiting for me to come closer. I crept out of bed, unable to stop myself. My legs moved as though pulled by invisible strings. The air was thick, each breath tasting faintly of rust and damp stone. The floor beneath my feet felt unsteady, as though I was stepping on something not quite solid, something that shifted with each movement. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the walls bowing inward, pressing closer, as though the house itself was contracting around me. The gap in the basement door yawned wider, revealing a darkness so complete it felt like looking into a void that would swallow me whole. I reached out, fingers trembling, to push the door shut again. The moment my hand brushed the wood, the breathing stopped. The air snapped back, the walls seeming to right themselves, but the door remained slightly open. I couldn't bring myself to close it all the way. Something told me not to. I backed away, step by step, until I was in my bedroom again. I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The silence stretched on, broken only by my own shallow breathing and the faint creak of the house settling. When I finally slept, I dreamed of the basement, of the door that wasn't supposed to be there. In the dream, I was standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the wooden box on the table. It was open again, the same as the night I'd first found it. Shapes pressed against the inside, shifting like smoke given form. They reached out, long fingers brushing the edges of the box, whispering in a language I couldn't understand but felt echo through my bones. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch as they spilled from the box, crawling across the dirt floor, dragging themselves upward toward me. Their eyes were pinpricks of light, mouths stretching into impossible grins. One of them reached me, pressing a finger against my forehead. I woke with a start, gasping, heart racing. The house was silent again, but when I glanced toward the hallway, the basement door was fully open. The scratches were deeper now, almost gouged into the wood. The stain had spread, a dark, wet trail seeping across the floor. And on the table near the door, something had been placed. The wooden box, closed, waiting. The door wasn't there yesterday, but now it's part of the house, part of me. And every night it opens wider. Every morning the scratches deepen, the stain spreads, and the box inches closer.